The time between when we last met. Okay. Hello everyone, and good evening and welcome to the Pinter at Queen Mary University of London. I'm Caoimhe McAvinchey and I'm the head of drama, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome our very special guest here this evening, Oliver Kent. Oliver is many things, and most recently he has been head of continuing drama at the BBC, looking after 5 continuing drama series: EastEnders, Holby City, Casualty, Doctors and River City. And those titles and those characters and those storylines have played an important role in the lives of so many people over so many years. He is also an alumnus of Queen Mary, and he graduated in 1995 with French and drama. And please join me in welcoming Oliver back to Queen Mary. Before we actually get into the conversation, I'd also like to welcome you, the audience who are here with us this evening, but also the conversation has been live streamed as well. So I'd like to say a very warm welcome to all of those of you who are watching from other places. And I think one of the things that would be helpful for Oliver and me in terms of the conversation is just to get a sense of who is in the audience in the Pinter right now. And I'm assuming that many of you, I know that some of you are current students in drama. But can I just get a show of hands in terms of how many of you are current students? Can we get a sense? Okay, so the vast majority. And are any of you recent graduates of Queen Mary? Okay, hello. And then for those of you who are studying, it's just helpful for us to get a sense. Are some of you film? Okay, so all on one side. And then, and drama students? Okay, was that a pre-arranged thing? Okay. It's very helpful because I think part of what we want to do tonight is not only find out about Oliver and his career, but think about it in terms of the things that you might be interested in finding out about television and drama as well. So, without further ado, we will begin, and we'd like to go back in time. And one of the things that Oliver was just saying, that he was here in the studio when it was opened, and I think it would be really helpful to know a little bit more about your time here at Queen Mary.
Sure. So I came here in 1992, which was the year that Queen Mary and Westfield, as was then, formally joined into one college in the same place, and it was referred to as Queen Mary Ann Westfield, which was a bit of a cumbersome title. This building and this studio was opened in that first term that I was here by the Queen. The then head of drama, James, had written a sort of long poem about, I think it was either the Black Death or it was about the Fire of London or something not entirely upbeat. I was posted up on the gantry, and I had 2 lines to say about the Fire of London and people panicking or something, and I remember it fondly. I'm sure the Queen doesn't. So I spent 3 years here, French and drama, but really my focus was drama. French was just the thing I did because you needed to do another subject with drama then, and this is where I wanted to do it, and I'm very glad I did. And I spent many happy and sometimes frustrating hours in this studio, where I was the gorilla in cabaret. I think because I couldn't dance or sing. I was a really terrible John the Baptist in someone's production of Salome. And then there was a school's tour that we did from here of the Wizard of Oz, in which I played, for some reason, a French Tin Man. And when we were going around the schools and we were putting the scenery back in the van, some kid came up to me and went, "Oi, Tin Git, you're shit." But actually, the kid was right. I was the most terrible actor, but it was fun. So yes, I had a great time here.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that's very interesting when we think about the very extraordinary career you are having, and particularly that decision to work in television and the different kinds of roles and different types of departments that you have been involved in, it's probably very easy for us to think, oh, you knew exactly what you were doing and you had a plan and a trajectory. Mm-hmm. Is that true? No. Okay.
I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do. In fact, all the way through my undergraduate period, I had the vague idea that maybe I wanted to be a director of theatre. It was only ever going to be theatre. I had no thoughts about screen drama or audio drama at all. It just hadn't crossed my mind, and maybe it should have done because I loved television and I loved film, but it just wasn't on my radar. And I got to the end of my degree, and at the time, I have to say, there were no such thing. This sort of event didn't happen. So there were quite a lot of us, bright young things wanting to move into the performing arts, but we had no idea. No one gave us any guidance at all. So I came out of it and thought, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. So I did an MA, which was fun and useful at King's College and RADA, and I enjoyed that very much. Got to the other end of that and thought, what am I going to do now? And I still didn't really know. I was lucky enough to have an evening job, which in one of the theatres in the West End. So I had something to keep me going, and I gave myself a year to try various things out. I thought I might try casting. I thought I might try looking at agent work. I thought maybe something in theatre administration. I just didn't really know. And I was fortunate enough through my front of house job to meet in passing a line producer from BBC Drama who said to me, "Are you interested in television?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Well, we have a runners pool. Why don't you come and have an interview for a runner's job?" And I went for the interview. And I don't know if it was because I didn't have any expectations and I wasn't putting too much pressure on myself. I passed the interview and got a job on a work experience basis on a single film on the rehearsals, and I was there for I was only meant to be there for a week. 22 years later, I was still at the BBC, but it opened my eyes to television because I just hadn't thought of it, and I didn't know all of the roles that there were. And I had this idea that if you worked in television, you were either a director or you were a writer. Or an actor. I didn't know that there were other things you could do. That there were hundreds of other jobs and careers, and also how much fun it was. So I had no. So, in the very long-winded answer to your question, I had no idea. It was happenstance, and I moved into 2 initially very happy years in working production, various production roles, as a runner, as what's called a third assistant director, as and now I don't think the role exists now, assistant floor manager. I was the world's worst assistant floor manager.
What does a floor manager do?
An assistant floor manager was in charge of action props. So I remember standing on Albert Square on, I think it was the 2nd of January, cutting cigarettes in half in the rain, because you have to, for continuity, sometimes cigarettes have to be cut to half the length. And thinking, I don't know if this is for me, but it was a very useful initial rite of passage into the world of how television and how television drama worked.
And so that sense of access to that world and the opportunity to try different roles within it.
Yes.
Were there, in terms of those kind of pivotal moments where you went, actually, I'm in this and I can see that and I want to do that, were there particular projects or particular people who've been very influential in helping you shape the career?
Yes, quite a lot. One of them is in this room, Mike Darwin. Hello, Mike. Hello. Who you should network with, because Mike has even more experience in television than I do, and the most amazing CV. What happened to me, and I guess what I would advise anyone to do, is I tried to make myself indispensable, and I tried to find out as much as I possibly could in each job I did when I was starting out. So when I was a runner, I loved being a runner, and it was very important to be a runner, to do that job perfectly, but also to talk to people and find out what they did, and to find out what the design department did, and how the sound department worked, and how post-production works. There were all these various different departments that I previously didn't know anything about, and I made it my mission to find out what everyone did. And because effectively a career in television, even if you work for the same company for a long period of time, you are effectively freelance. And that means you work from job to job to job. You work on perhaps a single drama for 6 weeks. You might work on a series for 3 months, but you are always looking for the next job. And so therefore you always have to be talking to people, finding things out, finding out what's coming up. And so I was a third assistant director on EastEnders, which I absolutely loved. It was great fun. But I realised that my interest lay in the story process and in what was happening in the stories. Now, production was fantastic, and I loved it. I was very lucky. But I realised that what I really wanted to be doing was helping generate the stories, to work with the writers. I moved more in a sort of producer direction, and so I made friends with script editors, with writers, with producers, and I just told them that's what I wanted to do, and I asked people to help point me in the right direction. And if people like you, and if you're good at your job, people will always help, because everyone's been through it. There's a sort of karmic responsibility, I think, on all of us to help people who are coming up after us. And so I suppose I learnt the value of networking before I knew it was networking. And before I thought of it as networking, because if you call it networking, it's terribly intimidating, although it's important. So it was, for me, it was all about conversations with people, about being interested, about paying genuine attention to what's coming up, what's happening in the industry, what writers are in fashion, etc.
And that shift then in terms of assistant director, and you're talking about being involved in generating stories and shaping stories. So is that the point in terms of, because you've done quite a lot of editing and then executive producing, and I think that's one of the things that, from someone who's from a theatre background and who, you know, watches the credits of television and films and see these roles, I suppose that's one of the things that's interesting to know about, is what kinds of roles do what kinds of jobs. So that sense of kind of being involved in generating and shaping stories, where do you go to do that?
Okay. In my case, I went for a job as a researcher on Casualty. And a researcher in drama always works on making the stories as realistic as they can possibly be. So you are immediately involved in the story team, you're working with writers, you're working with producers, you are helping shape the stories. And a lot of long-running dramas have researchers, and it's the best possible proving ground for up-and-coming editorial talent. And it may seem, when you're starting out, that it's a very big, difficult, impenetrable world, but the honest truth is that the television drama industry needs new people. It needs a kind of influx of talent all the time. And so that was the way. Now, a researcher will work with the script team, the writers, the story team. The next significant job that I did after that was I became a script editor, and it's probably worth. I mean, the film people may know what script editors do. Drama students, not necessarily. Am I right? Hands up if you know what a script editor does. Well, of course you do, right? Okay. A script editor's relationship with a writer is a bit like an actor and director. The script editor will help the writer mould their script, their story, into the finished product. You are their therapist, you are their director, you are sometimes their parent. Sometimes you are a sounding board. You're quite often a sounding board. But what you do is you develop a very, very close relationship with that writer, but you're also working on behalf of the production team. You help them shape their work. It's the most fantastic, creatively rewarding job, well, one of the most, certainly that I've ever done, because you hold their hand. And if you're working with a very experienced, very seasoned writer, then what you do is slightly different. It's slightly more at arm's length. But if you're working with someone who's new and vulnerable, and you can help them get a script to a place that they didn't know they could get to, it's incredibly rewarding. But in other ways, it's a bit like working in the sound department, because when it goes well, nobody knows you did it. Yeah. When it goes badly, you get the blame. But it's a really, really great job, and it's a very useful staging post for people who want to become producers in television, and for many who then become writers. But it's a really good creative job, and the television industry needs good script editors.
Because one of the things I find really I can't really get my head around is the fact that we're potentially working with not just one writer as a script editor and a executive producer, not one writer but a team of writers, that you will have all of these characters with sometimes incredibly decades worth of backstory, relationships that are there as a hinterland for the audience. You're also trying to develop a story that brings in new audience and keeps your existing audience. And potentially with something like Casualty, you're also engaging with contemporary issues in terms of NHS and crises and pressures on staff and individuals who are caught up in their families. And so it's just the capacity to manage all of that information, and I suppose also to do the what if when you're working with a writer who's trying to develop that. And so in that role as script editor and producing, how does that work in terms of that number of people, that amount of information, but also how long in advance are you planning for? You know, if you're writing something now, when will it get filmed? Is it next week or in 6 months' time? So there's lots of questions there.
Okay, well, in very basic terms, so we use Casualty as an example. The main storylines for Casualty are planned about a year in advance.
Right.
So the story team, the writers, the producers, the line producer will be holed up in a room, and they will think about where they want to go in the next year. What are the big, broad themes? For example, the current series that I was involved in planning, we decided we wanted to do a very big push on male mental health. That was the big theme of the series, and that it was going to be the year of the paramedics, and so we wanted to therefore tell a story through Ian, one of the lead paramedic characters. That was decided about a year to a year and a half, actually, in advance. The storylines themselves are then written by the story team and the lead writers, and then they're commissioned into individual scripts. about 6 months ahead of transmission. The script process takes about 3 months per script, and then it's filmed about 3 months before transmission. So there are things at various stages in development between a year and a few weeks before transmission. How do you keep it all in your head? There's a very big team, many of whom have been there a long time, and it's easier than it sounds. Not least because a lot of people on a long-running show like Casualty or EastEnders have been there from the beginning. I mean, there is a responsibility, because if you get it wrong, the audience will tell you very quickly.
Yes.
But it also, you can't let that intimidate you. You know, you can't worry about telling a story with Charlie because he's been in the show 33 years, because they'd never tell any story. But I do remember once we decided that we wanted to tell a story with Charlie's son Louis, who in the story probably should have been about 11. We decided to age him up to about 15. We thought the audience wouldn't notice, and they did. And they gave us hell because we had cheated. Because Casualty happens in real time, and the audience really know and they love those characters. And you can't play with the history. You have to be true to what's happened. And a significant part of a long-running drama's a significant character in a long-running drama is its history. You know, you can't embark on having anything to do with EastEnders without knowing the history, without knowing what it stands for, without knowing what happened in the Vic. And, you know, you do have, the history is really important, and it's actually something to embrace, not worry about.
The thing about the audience response, I'm really I'm just thinking about, you know, something like EastEnders. So I'm going to talk now about things that happened before anybody was born. But, you know, at a time where, you know, you might have had 4 or 5 channels, and something like EastEnders arriving on the landscape, the theme tune, you know, you would hear that in another room, you'd know what time of the day it was, you'd know what day it was as well. But also there were particular stories and particular characters that were just so fundamental in terms of British cultural life, and in terms of making an audience see issues or understand issues through individuals in a way which allowed a kind of a public conversation. And now with all the kind of feedback and commentary from audiences, I just that sense of, when does your audience lead a story? Does it ever lead a story?
That's a really good question. And over time, a lot has changed, and the audience has a much more direct engagement in the programmes than I think they ever have done before, in the sense that the interaction via Twitter, via Instagram, via Facebook, all of these social mediums,
media, yes.
Study French now. They mean that, you know, they can absolutely tell you what they think. It is misleading just to follow those, and what, in my experience, the value is to balance that with some proper in-depth forensic audience research, so that you know how the audience is really responding to something. Because sometimes Twitter can absolutely magnify the reaction to a story, that when you take it in context and you actually look at the number of people interacting with it, it's quite small. So and also, I mean, as many of you will know, the Slater family in EastEnders, when they first joined the show, they were very, very unpopular for, I think it was about 9 months to a year. Is that right, Mike?
They came...
I'm putting Mike on the spot. He's there.
I worked on EastEnders for a couple of years.
Yeah.
They came a couple of... they were getting popular when I joined.
It took a while. And so sometimes, and I've experienced that a lot, where you introduce a new character, a new family, or a new situation, new set even. The audience don't always go for it straight away. And sometimes you have to hold your nerve. If a storyline is completely bombing, then you know it, and then you can take your way. You can sort of sometimes do a bit of a handbrake turn out of it. But for example, we told a story in Holby City about 18 months ago, which initially split the audience. We put our character Dominic in a relationship with another character, Isaac, and it was not meant to look particularly comfortable. But what we had planned was that at a particular point in the Christmas episode, we would reveal that Isaac was abusive, and that had been staring the audience in the face all along. So sometimes you have to sort of lay out a trail that you know might divide the audience, but you know that at a certain point you'll bring them back in again. But if you do have to pay attention. If they are departing in droves, then you have taken a wrong turn.
Yes, yes. And that sense of kind of how many people are watching and how quickly people are either joining and watching or not watching, do you get that quite quickly? Is
Absolutely.
it? Yeah.
You get that. You get overnights the following day, and you get consolidated audiences. I think it's a week or 10 days later or something. But it's really important these days because the audience size is smaller than it used to be in terms of how many people will watch a particular programme. But the importance is no less, but the competition is vast. I mean, you know, there are countless channels and places that people can go for their screen entertainment, and you cannot rely on it being BBC One at 7:30 p.m. They're all going to come to you, because they're not. You have to keep them there. So, you know, you have an absolute responsibility of humility, I think, in front of the audience.
That leads me on to one of the other questions, was about really in the time that you've worked at the BBC, there have been so many technological advances in terms of the making television, making film, you know, and again, 1980s, 4 or 5 channels, now hundreds, maybe thousands of channels. You know, thinking about, you know, what have those technological possibilities, what kinds of impacts have you noticed in terms of the kinds of dramas that can get made now?
I think there's two answers to that question. In one sense, everything's changed. In another sense, nothing's changed, because the principles are still the same. Drama is still drama. You still have to hook your audience. You still have to tell a good story. You still need all of the basic fundamental ingredients of drama. The technology, you're right, is completely and utterly changed, and for the better. It's quicker, it's lighter, it's more flexible, it's more agile. The things that you can do with cameras, with sound equipment, are far superior to even 10 years ago. It's changing all the time, you know, and you know, widescreen televisions, we're all used to widescreen televisions. Not that long ago, it was all 4:3. The picture looked completely different. And the technology and the design had to get better in order to make room for these widescreen televisions and for high definition and all the rest of it. But I think the competition for audiences via the vast number of platforms is the biggest change, because you just have to compete all the harder for audiences. In the time of, you know, you can go and watch, I'm just trying to think of a box set type, Sex Education. You can go and watch every single episode of Sex Education in an evening if you want to. That makes it quite difficult to compete for the terrestrial programs to compete with, because they still have to have as big an offering. And in an audience that is looking for big definition, for big signature pieces, for really bold, out there dramas, they really everything has to punch above its weight, and everything has to be hooky. You know, I think there is, in my opinion, more of a need for distinctiveness, for stuff which is youth focused or will sell to a younger and more diverse audience. So I think I've rambled. Did that make sense?
No, it does. Both in I think also just in terms of the kind of the equipment, but also the impact on kind of what gets told and how it gets told. I think also that question about, you know, the audience and the stories that get told, and I suppose that sense of being inside an organisation for that amount of time. I'm just curious about how an organisation, the BBC, particularly in terms of its responsibility, in terms of the licence fees payer, in terms of that idea about entertainment but also education, and about representation of its audience, and thinking about a diversification of the stories that are told, the voices that are heard. What are the ways in which you have seen that shift, and what are the structures that you've seen that are now in play that weren't there, that aren't just about starting out, but are actually about just long-term development, particularly people in a middle career as well? So I suppose it's partly about stories and partly about staff who work there.
Yeah. I think there's been a very big change in those terms. I think there's further to go in all broadcasters and all production companies with a view to diversity and inclusion across the board. It used to, I think it's fair to say, be seen as something of a responsibility that people bought into, but they didn't necessarily embrace it. Whereas I think there has now been a change in that it's not a responsibility, well, it is a responsibility, but actually it's fun. We should be telling stories that are about the whole of the UK. They're not just about a particular group who look and sound like me. That's not interesting. And so there has been a much more concerted push within the BBC and elsewhere about diversity and inclusion in every single respect. And just before I left the BBC, we initiated a big disability mentoring scheme, because we'd realised that there was a presence of disability as an issue on screen that was beginning to improve. Off screen, it wasn't improving fast enough, and people didn't want to be spoken down to. They wanted to be included. They wanted jobs, and people don't want schemes. They want jobs, and that becomes a commitment that that everybody involved in making staffing choices has to sign up to. You have to think about where will your middle career people be in 5 years' time. Where are you going to get those from to start them now? How are you going to see those people through their career? And in a career where it's fundamentally freelance, you've got to offer people something interesting to stay for and to come for in the first place. But I think, therefore, a multiplicity of voices told through the stories, told through the characters on screen, like follows like. People follow role models, and it hopefully will continue the movement that has been happening.
But it's industry-wide. I think that's one of the things.
It's absolutely industry-wide, and it's quite joined up, which I think is fantastic. I used to get a lot of phone calls from I've forgotten her name now, but one of the editorial leads at Channel 4 used to regularly phone me up to talk to me about BME female directors and who we knew in common and who we could recommend to each other. And there is a sort of sense of cross-industry collaboration, often run by organisations such as the BFI or BAFTA or oh gosh, I'm so sorry, what's it called? Skill Set. There is a sort of in a profession that's fundamentally freelance. Everyone's sharing the same talent, so it's very good to jointly promote. Does that answer? Yeah,
it does. It does. I'm just going to check the time. Okay. It's nearly 40 minutes. Okay, I've got two questions I'm going to ask, and then we'll open it out. I suppose, what have you most enjoyed working on?
Which show?
Yeah.
I've never answered that question.
Okay.
And when I used to say that each programme scratched a slightly different itch. But I think probably my heart was always in Casualty.
Why?
Because it's about Britain, it's about the world we live in, and it's a show about nurses and heroes and people doing their best, and it's a fundamentally nosy show, and it's a soap, and it's fun to watch. It's always got stunts. It's a little action movie, and I just always loved the characters, and I think probably it was Casualty was my favourite.
Okay, and then last question before we open it out is, if you were to give your 18, 19, 21-year-old self some advice about the road ahead, what would it be?
It would have been don't be intimidated. Because, and that's honestly, I think one of the best pieces of advice, find a way to demystify what it is you want to do. Don't be intimidated by it, because it seems like a huge wall in front of you. You think, oh my God, I'll never get into that. But there's no reason why you shouldn't. There's no reason, the industry, the whole performing arts industry, but television needs new people all of the time. It's not that it's going to guarantee a career or a income stream necessarily, but don't be intimidated. That would be probably the biggest piece of advice I would give.
There's something, we met a couple of weeks ago to have a chat, and there's something that stayed with me. And you were saying about you don't have to be a particular kind of person to work in television, and that has stayed with me. I think in terms of you're talking about shy people. Yeah. It's a place for shy. It's a place for everybody. But I think that's one of the things I really heard, because I think the choices that people make and the assumptions that they make about an industry are absolutely up for being challenged. And what you're saying is that it really is.
And I think that's probably one of the reasons I never thought about television, because I thought television people had to be sort of brash and noisy and like apprentice candidates, and I was really shy, and thought that I'd never fit in, and it's not true. There's room for everyone. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So what we'll do is we're going to open out for questions from the floor, and it would be helpful if you could put your hands up, and then Olivia is going to come round with a mic. And can I get a sense of how many questions there are in the room? Yeah. There's a run at the back of row of film students. Should we start at the corner and work our way along to the aisle? Oops. Sorry.
Hiya. I'm actually a history student. I just kind of walked in. You were talking at the beginning about a woman that you met who said that you should probably go and look for a job in the BBC. What kind of questions were you asking her? How did you ask for help, essentially, from the people who you realised you needed help from, who had the information that you knew you needed?
At that point, when I met it was, once I started working, that was easy, because if you're interested and if you're curious, you sort of see things going on around you, and you just have to not be embarrassed about asking. I think when I met the lady, I just bombarded her with polite questions about what she did, what people did, how does it work. So that's not a very interesting answer to your question, but actually, and these days, what is good is that everybody's got email. A lot of people are on Twitter. You can very easily contact people whose names you see on the list of credits. Not everyone's going to be polite enough to come back to you, but an awful lot of people are. And I've always believed that it's important to respond to people, have a cup of coffee with them, even if it's just to chat about how things work. And you'll find that a lot of people are very happy to do that. So that's what I would say. Just, and then when you do that, if you make contact with, let's say, a line producer from a particular drama company, when you go and meet them, make sure you've done your homework. I'm not suggesting you wouldn't, but you would be surprised at the number of people who don't. Go in with an opinion on what they do, with a bit of informed knowledge of the productions that they make, for example. Don't be scared to approach people, and most people will be happy to be chatted to. Okay. Don't necessarily buttonhole them in the theatre if it's their night off. That could be annoying.
Hi, hello. I'm also not a film or drama student. I do history and politics, but I'm here anyway. I'm going to be the sort of the token representation BME question. But you already spoke about representation specifically in the BBC. But I was wondering if you could expand on what specific structures are in place for BAME kind of marginalised people in the industry, both off and on screen. And also, could you give some more advice, perhaps, on people working on a career for script writing or script editing? Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Can we do the career bit first? Yeah, okay. If you want to be a script editor, and you want to be a script editor and you want to be a writer, that's a really great way through. It's not the only way through. You know, plenty of people become writers without having done that, but a lot of writers I've worked with in recent years who've become very successful have been script editors. If that's what you're going to do, my advice is don't be a script editor for too long, because you should do it for long enough that you learn your craft, that you learn everything there is to know about structure and all of those things that can trip you up. But at the point that you know you're ready, then you must jump, because if you stay doing something too long that you know isn't your dream, you can turn a bit bitter. So only you will know when that is, and also you have to take the leap at some point if you want to be a writer. You should watch everything that's on television. You should have an opinion on where new writers are coming from. You should know new writers if you can. So keep up to date with what's going on in the new writing, producing houses, and in theatre and in radio and in television as well. The currency of script editors is writers. So if you can go into a meeting, let's say you went in for a meeting for EastEnders and you said, I've got 3 writers that I know through Soho Theatre or through Stratford East, then you're quite hot property. So it's about what you can bring in terms of writers, but also what you have, what your own opinions are of the productions or the company that you're going in to suggest yourself for as a script editor or a writer. You have to go in armed with 5% more knowledge than anyone else will, because there is a bit of competition.
Oliver, can I interrupt a bit? Because I think one of the things about writing is as well about, sort of to the next question about structures, because I'm aware of various schemes that there may be within theatre and performance, but it's just how much crossover is there in terms of people who write for theatre, in terms of writing for television, because often it tends to be kind of one for quite a while, but is that sense of actually wanting to work in television experience in theatre is really helpful? Or
all writing is helpful, all storytelling is helpful. And there is quite a bit of crossover between television and theatre. There's more with directors, interestingly. Writers, often people will start in theatre, move into television and stay there. There's no shame in that, but I think it would be nice if people did both more often. And I think these days there is a sense that that is an interesting thing to do. There is a resource that is worth tapping into as well, which is a phenomenal thing the BBC offers, which is the writers' room. I don't know if you're all aware of it, but if you're not, look up what they do, what they offer, the schemes that they run, the workshops, the script reading that they offer. They are really good demystifying force for good, and Anne Ediving, who runs it, is brilliant at what she does.
And the other parts of the questions in terms of structures then?
Well, there are programmes will offer their own shadow schemes for writers. They will sometimes specifically be looking for BME talent, but even when they don't declare that they are specifically for that, there is a stated aim that is a yawning need within TV drama. And it's not for me to speak on behalf of the BBC or indeed any other broadcaster, but the industry genuinely does need more diverse voices. So if you look at writing programs, for example, training programs, they will always have a specific need for diverse voices, even if they don't publicise a quota. And there's a lot of discussion about whether quotas are useful or not. There will always be a need for that, so don't be put off. Does that answer in any way your question? Okay, cool. And also, I'll answer the question you didn't ask, which is it doesn't matter what your degree is. I mean, it's useful to have a film degree, it's useful to have a drama degree, it's not essential.
But another in the back, in that.
Hi, I'm a film student. I was just wanting a more technical idea of how you do audience success, because obviously in the modern day, with the fact that not everybody actually watches it live, and actually not everybody even will watch it on the BBC, how do you work out whether a program's successful, and moreover, how do you target an audience that you can't always be sure about?
The exact mechanics of how audience data is gathered is slightly beyond me. But most viewing on platforms other than Netflix and Amazon is reported. Netflix and Amazon don't. I don't know if they ever will, and it's impossible to get a sense of how successful their stuff is unless they tell you, and they don't always. How do you target? Well, that's a very good question. These days, marketing, campaigns, social, all of those things are fundamentally important in a way that they weren't always. You'll see an awful lot of promotion on the Tube, for example, for television programmes that you wouldn't have seen before necessarily. Things will be pushed via Twitter. I mean, there's the traditional, if you like, methods of promoting a programme, which is putting people on chat shows. It's articles in the press, the printed press, that sort of thing. That's still really, really important, but it's getting the word out elsewhere that becomes more and more important.
Okay. I think we've probably got time for maybe 2 questions. There's one in the very back row, and is there another? Yes, in the third row. Okay.
I just wanted to ask, what is the crossover like between sort of drama, continuing drama, comedy, sort of those areas, and what's the crossover like between staff that are doing writing and stuff that are doing sort of directing and then production, editorial? Like, is there a lot of talent that is sort of crossing over between those borders, or is it all very sort of specialised?
I think there tends to be a fair amount of movement with writers and directors between comedy and drama. I think probably more than there has traditionally been, I think. But also I think the edges of what's drama and what's comedy are becoming usefully slightly blurred. I mean, is Fleabag a comedy or is it a drama? Is it both? Does it matter? This Country, is that a drama? You could argue it is. Is it comedy? But a lot of the same type of people make them. I mean, you do get comedy specialists, absolutely, and you do get drama specialists, and you get people who don't want to move, but it's absolutely possible to. Some people write and direct. It's not uncommon. It's not that common, but it's possible. Production teams, you get an awful lot of movement. Because the production skills are pretty similar.
Can I come in there, Ollie? Because
yes.
When I started in studio management. Thank you. Microphone. I started in studio management in the BBC about 20 years before Oliver. Just shows you the age difference. Certainly, when I started my career, I was in a department called studio management. I worked up a similar sort of ladder. I was a studio runner, and then I was an assistant floor manager, which you mentioned, which is akin to an ASM or stage manager in the theatre, very, very similar. And then I found myself in the light entertainment department working on variety shows. I did 3 series with a lady called Marty Kane, who I don't know if you've ever heard of her. Older people might have done. I did a lot of sitcoms, but I particularly wanted to do drama, like Ollie. My degree, like some of you here, was in drama, and English and drama, actually, rather than French and drama. Not here, at Bangor University in North Wales. I found that it was relatively easy then for us to move from one department to the other. A lot of people wanted to stay, and a lot of my friends became sitcom producers, directors, and all the rest of it. But I was able to move across, and quite a lot of people do. I'm assuming that because, as you say, the skills are very, very similar, the same, that you can still do that, obviously.
Yeah, I think you can. I think the fact that, there's no such thing as a traditional career pathway. Yeah. I don't think there ever was, and there certainly isn't now. And people choose their own career paths, and in a way,
I mean, it's changed with the independent sector becoming so big.
Yeah,
because it's before, when I joined, and probably when Ollie joined as well to a certain extent, it was the BBC or ITV. Channel 4 didn't even exist when I joined the BBC. So consequently, your choices were limited. Now they are much, much wider, and you get the opportunities. Now you have to learn to network, as Oliver said, with all these different people, but they're all going to be very, very helpful because they all need your talent.
And there's no set pathway. You can start out in production accounting and move into design. There's nothing stopping you. You have to. It's, in a way, the word career is not helpful because it's slightly limiting. It sort of makes you think like you have to fit it into a box. Think of it as a loose collection of jobs and do the thing that you want to do next and choose your own pathway. I mean, it sounds a little bit platitudinous, but it's honestly true.
Thank you. And then one final question before we mingle.
I was wondering what advice you would give to somebody who wants to start on a career where they work more on the ground with actors, either as a performer themselves or helping out in rehearsals to get ready for things for set and filming, or even just as a caster, particularly if that person doesn't have on paper an academic qualification in drama, but they've done a lot outside of the classroom. Where would you advise they start?
Start at the beginning of the question again, if you wouldn't mind.
So what advice would you give for somebody looking to start a career where they would work with actors, either be an actor or work with actors in the rehearsal room or as a caster?
Okay. Well, they're obviously two quite different careers. If you want to work in casting, then the thing you need to do is know a lot about casting, and you need to. That sounds platitudinous, but it's honestly true. You need to know who are the big casting directors in the industry, and what do they do, what productions are they working on. You also need to know actors. So if you go in for an interview to be a casting assistant on Series 7 of Endeavour, you will be expected to know who's in the show, who are their agents, who is up and coming and good, who's not been snapped up, who have you just seen in Theatre Royal Stratford East that you could recommend. You've got to really know that world, and then target the casting companies, the casting departments. Spotlight itself. Spotlight's based in was based in Leicester Square. Offer yourself up for whatever job you can get. For actors, that's an entirely different thing, and it's very difficult to be a casting director and an actor. I don't know if anyone has ever successfully managed it. It's that they're sort of in competition with each other in a way. Acting isn't obviously the hardest thing you could possibly ever want to do, and good luck to you if you want to pursue it. My advice to you is if that's what you want to pursue and you know it, then absolutely go for it. And the thing that you have to protect more than anything else is your mojo, because as an actor, everything you have depends on that. Your ability to get jobs, your ability to keep jobs, your ability for people to say nice things about you depends on you having an intact mojo. I mean, it's sort of true for anything you do within the drama profession, but more particularly for actors than for anything else. Does that help? Good. Okay.
And so, any other questions that may be bubbling under but you don't want to ask in front of everybody? In a moment we'll have time and we can go outside and get some refreshments and have a chat. But before that, Andrea Cox, who from Careers, is here, and she's going to tell you a little bit about Queen Mary Careers.
Thank you, Kiefer and Oliver, for a really, really fascinating talk. And I just wanted to tell you a little bit about some of the things that are going on kind of currently at Queen Mary Careers for current students, and kind of support that we can offer you after you leave as well. So at the moment we're live streaming, which is fantastic. So we're going to make the video of today available to everybody, along with some really useful links about where you can get started in terms of more labour market information, where you can get paid placements in TV. So that will be coming round shortly. And what I would also say is that we are, for people who are currently students, we are offering you guys 2 years of free career support. So as you go off into the creative industries or into TV, film, or wherever you go, you can come back and talk to us, either through one-to-one appointments or come to events like these to pick up a lot of these kind of insider tips. You can do that totally for free for up to 2 years after you graduate, because sometimes when you're studying, you've got a lot of other things going on. You don't always have the time to come to these things, but you can come back at any time for 2 years. So I really hope you make use of that, people who do find it really, really useful. And then for people who are perhaps already established in particular industries, because I know we have some people who are alumni already, what we'd really like to kind of encourage you to do and build up more and more in the next few years is kind of coming back and offering your services to current students, especially students from BME backgrounds or perhaps more disadvantaged backgrounds, to offer your services as a mentor. And I've actually got a flyer that I'm going to be handing out at the networking drinks in a moment. But we're really keen that as Oliver shared his tips with you today, that as you go into your next journey in your careers, you're kind of feeding back into the current community, and that we're creating a bit of a chain of I suppose, learning. And just as Oliver, you said about this karmic responsibility that, you know, if people are nice to you, then you give somebody else a bit of a leg up as a result. I think that's really how a lot of industries work. And so as you go forward into your career, please think about becoming a mentor for our current students. It's basically a 3 to 6 month commitment where you meet once a month and you help somebody develop and you help them understand a bit about what it is that's important to them. So bear that in mind, either if you're currently an alumni with about 3 years professional experience, or as you go into your career, bear that in mind. So yeah, I can talk more about that in the networking, but just to say thank you so much for all of your insights, and really look forward to talking to you in the networking in a moment. So I'll pass back to Kiefer to finish off.
Okay, I'm all grand. Yeah, thank you. All right, Andrea, thank you. And I'd just like a few other thank yous. I'd like to say particular thanks to Olivia O'Connell, who has organised everything so calmly and with great detail and rigour and so smoothly, and to Jules Deering, who's Drama's technical manager, and also to Christian Hayward, who has been looking after the live streaming. But the biggest thanks really to Oliver, because it's been absolutely fascinating to hear more about sort of the layers and the movement in that particular world, and for being so generous with your insights. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Oliver, very, very much. Just going to be this sudden rush of people wanting to work in television now.